let's start with an introduction. You both got labs, great. I don't have to have the mic. Let's start with an introduction. Eric.
Eric Klein, Director Infrastructure Delivery, although that title should change. Basically, I handle all things CDN over at Disney Streaming Services.
Yeah, I'm Flavio, Director of Engineering at CBS Interactive. I'm currently working on the Central Video Technology Group, which is basically responsible for delivering technology across the 28 plus business units, including CBS Sports, News, all the way to CNET, ZDNet, Tech Republic, GameSpot, and the other business units that we have under the CBS Interactive umbrella.
So you just both given an introduction in under a minute, and you guys do an awful lot of stuff across your networks, right? That was a lot of stuff wrapped up into a 1 minute intro.
It's the only way you deal with it mentally. It's like it's all just one.
Yeah.
Okay, so talk to me about the infrastructures that you're overseeing and the challenges that you're having to respond to put those infrastructures in place.
Sure. So on our side, it's a lot of third-party commercial CDNs that we still leverage. So quite a lot of different technical implementations that you need to manage across the board, different requirements, different features, different functions, all the way down to, we just heard about capacity and capacity scale issues, capacity as well, how our partners might be able to support our events and our streaming. And then, at the same point, we interface very closely. I'm on a shared team with our Origin engineering team, so working very closely with them. Yeah, we are co-directors of the same team and kind of interface back and forth, and it's the only way that you can have a very tight-knit, well-oiled machine for delivery on both the live and the VOD side, and planning for both kind of aspects of it.
And Flavio, same for you, yeah?
Yeah, for CBSI side, we are kind of spread across America, so we have a team dedicated to delivery in San Francisco. We have another team here, mostly focused in video processing as a whole for VOD and live, and some challenges that we have. I mean, we have like all the way from like college sports, live streaming events. We are now just live streaming the Microsoft event through CNET, and we go all the way to the Super Bowl, which we did in February, the Super Bowl 53.
Okay, so that's a good, just bookmark Super Bowl there, and Eric, pick a big workflow from your remit of gigs and jobs that you've been doing. Name one, go on.
We've done the Super Bowl as well.
Okay, we'll do the Super Bowl. Problem is I can't ask questions about Super Bowl because I have no idea what goes on in the sport. But
you
I
want
can
World
ask
Cup?
about the technology. Yeah, well, that'll do fine.
Yeah.
No, I
Cup,
don't follow
Super Bowl?
football either. I'm terrible.
Yeah.
I don't follow football either, but I'm just rubbish. But talk us through one of these big live workflows. Let's start literally right out in the field with the encoding. What's the build through right through to the consumer?
Sure. So there's quite a lot that are handled by, as I'm sure you'd imagine with Disney streaming, a lot of different individuals and different teams within our infrastructure. The easiest way to kind of break it down is once we acquire the signal from our partners. Once we pull that in, preparing it, both encoding it into multiple different formats for delivery, as well as packaging it for all the different platforms that we need to reach. Kind of two separate teams, two different components in the workflow that need to be satisfied as part of the overall chain. All this entire large infrastructure being overseen by a kind of a core media operations team that's always looking at everything from quality to capacity to compute to performance across the entire chain. They're kind of the glue that holds it all together. Once it's prepared for packaging, it then gets prepared for storage and web serving. And then after we handle all of the storage, web serving, caching that you'd imagine would be done on a local infrastructure, we then work to deliver it out from the edge. Multiple different partners, multiple different decisioning engines and choices. It's all based on different use cases and workflows.
And is your point of origin in that type of workflow, is your point of origin the same as the traditional broadcast point of origin, or are you getting totally separate workflows right through from
Depends on the partners. Depends on the content sources. In some scenarios, it is the same as the broadcast origin. In other scenarios, it's grabbed off of the switch or grabbed even via IP and pushed to us.
Flavio, is it the same sort of architecture? Or?
Yeah, it also depends on the project that you're talking about. We have a few 24/7 live streaming channels across the different business units again. And speaking of Super Bowl, it was like a whole different beast we needed to implement the whole workflow, the end-to-end workflow from scratch. And I mean, I'm sure we're gonna be talking more about this, but basically it depends on the partner, it depends on the business unit. We do have a few vendors included in this process, so when it comes to CDN decisioning, like we have a few vendors that we work with. The CDNs themselves, we have a few CDNs in the mix. So it always depends on how big of the problem we are talking about.
And so you sound like both parties, you're not really dealing with the contribution link.
Not as much.
Okay, but you presumably, so that's coming into a data center somewhere and then being forwarded to you rather than hitting you direct. You're not providing.
In our case, we kind of interact directly with the broadcast center. Mm-hmm. So for some feeds, we work with them in the ground, and we kind of build some hybrid workflows where we have encoders, like on-premise encoders. We feed these encoders with a cloud origin and stuff like that. So we kind of do some of the hybrid workflows as well.
And when you're merging, like, something like the Super Bowl, it's not just a straight stream. You're presumably cutting in and out into different ad breaks or different interstitial content. And
yeah,
so
yeah.
You've done it more recently. I'll let you talk about that part.
Yeah, ads is a challenge apart. And when you're like building a project for an event in this scale, you should not only look at the live streaming itself, but also the whole ecosystem. So all the APIs, all the static files, how you're going to be serving the ads. You need to take all of those into account. And as you add more layers of redundancy, you kind of increase the complexity. And it's not in a linear way. It's actually in an exponential way. Right. Every time you add a new layer, you kind of need to test all the different combinations of those layers. So that was the major effort for us, was to basically test unplugging an encoder from the power, changing like origins, so like all of these things were the most like complex piece of delivering this event.
Are you using like signaling like SCSI-35 in those streams coming out of the contribution?
Yes, exactly. We had a server to basically parse the SCSI 104s coming from the broadcast. We transformed in 35. We also added ID3 tags for some players in some devices. So yeah, at the end of the day, we had both SCSI 35 and ID3 tags in the feed.
Okay. And yours works similar?
I mean, we deal with similar markers. The one additional thing I would say is we do have some manual aspects to it as well, just in case. Yeah. Right. We have effectively log cutters, right? Content goes to break, and we'll go ahead and trigger off of them to make the decision or make the choice to issue the break within the manifest itself that then triggers the entire process for delivery.
And so do you guys both run full diversity all the way through everything? Have you got 2 points of entry or more than that, or do you what's the sort of spread of architecture on that basis?
Redundancy is crucial.
Yeah.
I mean, redundancy is kind of the only way you can deal with an event of this nature or multiple events of these nature is to ensure that you have backups upon backups. Mm-hmm. So at every layer, you can look at something as basic as DNS, right? We have multiple DNS providers in play, and we have multiple load balancing options for those multiple DNS providers. It's at every point in the chain, something as simple as DNS that couldn't necessarily break. You want to be prepared that should it have an issue, you can quickly and easily trigger something to have a backup to ensure that the stream gets out there. And in certain scenarios, it's like in those scenarios that things are just going to heck and you need to make sure that a customer gets the content, because that's the key thing at the end of the day, is that they can continue to watch the stream. You ensure that you have a backup upon a backup that might be unencrypted, that might be completely available, and it's just like, dear customer, go watch the content. Yeah. There are certain providers in the space that have had to do that. I'm very thankful that we don't necessarily have to do that, but there are certain providers that have had to do that, and you kind of see it, and it's great. Customers get the content, but ultimately it also leads to this whole press storm, and you kind of want to avoid that as much as possible.
Yeah, and as Eric mentioned, like it's all about the user experience. for Super Bowl, again, we had a few encoders spread in New York City, in Stanford. We had another encoders in Los Angeles, in the TV city. And we had multiple origins. So we had one origin on the East Coast, another one on the West Coast. And we made sure to test all the different mixes and matches of the different layers. And as Diane was mentioning, when the error pops in the dashboard, it's already too late. Yeah. So we need to figure out how to make all of these different tests before the game day. Yeah. So we basically used pretty much all the different sports events in the weeks before Super Bowl to test the Super Bowl workflow.
And how much of your infrastructure is kind of fixed on-prem, to use that sort of weird expression, and how much are you starting to use public cloud or building your own private cloud? What's the sort of spread there?
I would say we're evenly mixed. We have quite a lot of our services that run in public cloud or primarily private cloud, but using public cloud providers. And then we do still handle quite a lot of our media on premise. There's something to be had about owning and controlling your media workflow end to end that enables you a bit more control and a bit more ability to nimbly make changes if there's
honestly
an issue.
Sign the SLA in the contract.
I mean, listen, if you're the one on the SLA, you've got to make sure it delivers. So there are certain things you do want to own. And from our scenario, it's very much a kind of crucial part of our on-premise environment is that media.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we've been, as a company, we've been kind of following the trend of moving to the cloud. So our data centers are kind of decreasing in size. We're mostly focused in developing new products in the cloud. When it comes to video streaming as a whole, we've been trying to build agnostic systems. So we don't we are trying to avoid vendor lock-in in all the different cases, including video streaming. So we are now building a live streaming platform that will sit on top of multiple different cloud providers. And we're going to be able to basically pick the components, the cloud components that we need for a given situation. So if you want a DVR, we're going to be picking the products that can deliver DVR. If you just want like a basic plain HLS and you want to do like VOD clips out of this plain live streaming event, we're going to be picking and mixing and matching these different components in the cloud. So I'd say, in short, we are kind of moving towards using more of the cloud for the majority of the events, but for the big ones, we may be working more closely with the broadcast center folks and doing some of the hybrid approaches, as Eric mentioned.
So do you see the public cloud model as increasing risk or decreasing risk for these high availability live streams and premium content?
I don't really know if it's necessarily increasing or decreasing risk. I think it just shifts some of the responsibility, right? You still need to be responsible for scaling out your services. You still need to be responsible for building the right solutions and ensuring things that are correctly configured and available. It's kind of a nebulous environment in terms of what are the best options available to you at any given point. You never want to go down one path that leads to like this uncomfortable moist ending. You want to go down this path that just leads to consistency, stability, and proper performance. And really the only way to do that is to have multiple different options, both public cloud, private cloud, on-prem, and all of them being kind of working in concert for the specific use case or solution.
Yeah, totally agree again. I think that in a company of the size of CBS, Disney, and all the other big media conglomerates, we should be able to have full control of whatever we want to do, and some cloud options may not give you the full control you need. So how can you balance the full control, the responsibilities, and like the shifting of the accountability of the components in a given situation?
Yeah, so there's less control on off-prem, but there's also the upside of infinite resource.
Yeah,
resource.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, it's also working in a partnership fashion with the cloud services. It's bringing them on site. It's talking to them about the features you need, the features you don't need. Like, how can you help the cloud providers to shape the roadmap towards your goals and how can you play this game. And it's a win-win situation when you look at a partner, look at the cloud provider as a partner instead of just a vendor.
So what are the things that keep you up at night or the night before the World Cup or the Super Bowl? What are the things that keep you awake?
Yeah, I'd say stability overall. I think for the major events, we usually set up war rooms where we have, again, all the partners in the same room. We have the CDN providers, the CDN engineers in the room. We have ISP people in the room. So creating a safe environment for this kind of events where you don't really need to escalate over the phone or Slack. You have everyone in the same room. We set up this room here in New York City. We had another one in San Francisco, and it was extremely helpful for the success of the event because failures will happen. It's just how you handle those failures. And I think this was, creating this environment where failures are acceptable will help you to sleep better.
Yeah, failures are part of the equation. You always have to prepare for them to occur and hope that they don't. I think the way you phrased it, right, keep me up at night, it kind of got past that about 2.5 years ago. It's now more about just going into the event, what are the things you really keep your eye on? What are the aspects that you want to make sure are always available, always covered, and always have someone looking at glass to ensure that things are moving smoothly. And we don't necessarily invite our CDN vendors in-house. We keep them a little bit more at arm's length. But we do work very closely with all of our vendors across the board and all of our different partners and be as transparent as we can be so that everyone knows what's going on in the moment at the exact time and quick communication flows. And I think at the end of the day, the challenge that you ultimately run into is you have an expectation of what the scale will be, but you don't actually know what the real scale will be. Yes. And so being prepared, but being prepared enough, not too much, because that impacts performance, and not too little, because that obviously leads to poor customer experience.
Yes, and also making sure that you have a main goal, and usually the main goal is to deliver a good experience to the users. So with that said, you can kind of shape what you want to dedicate your time. So for example, the SCUDdy markers and the ads tracking and everything, it's pretty important for large scale events, but it's not the major
sacrificial in the event
outcome. You should be more concerned about the user experience. If they will face rebuffers, if the startup time is good, this is more important for the company and the brand and the users as a whole than just looking at the details. So having a major goal, like a headline of what you want to do in the event, will help you drive the roadmap and focus in what's more important.
You never hear a customer complain, I can't watch my ad.
Yeah, exactly.
But you'll hear them complain if content won't work.
Yeah, exactly.
Slate's not the best thing to deliver during an ad break, but
if it's informative,
listen, if it's between the content being served properly with consistency and the proper performance, or it's Slate, you serve the content.
Exactly.
So do you think that we're going to see a point where the Super Bowl is just going to appear on one of your diaries, and you're just going to go, okay, that's just Tuesday, and you're going to sort of not think about it, or are these special high-profile events always going to?
I think that at least for the next 5 to 10 years, or maybe more, I don't think we're going to be in this situation because we see a trend of people tending to watch more on the OTT devices, and new devices are always coming to the landscape, and you need to keep up with these new devices that are coming to the market. At the same time, you kind of see a shift of the audience from the traditional television and broadcast to the internet. So we are still seeing this kind of ramping up, and I do see that we are talking about multiple different protocols that we can do. So it's we are now dealing with HLS-CMAF. I'm pretty sure that new things are going to come in the landscape. We are talking about different DRM models, and I see like that we are still in the beginning of like how we're going to be doing live events in like 10 or 20 years. So I don't think it's the time yet to just face a Super Bowl event as a normal event that will just pass through the bridge.
I mean, Super Bowl level event, yes, but I would also say normalcy breeds numbness. And so the more and more that we do these large scale events, the less and less I get kind of angsty about it, stressed about it. There's no point, right?
Yeah.
You have to do it. You have to deliver it and it'll work because you've made it work before. So really the only challenge is how do you, and you've gone through the same preparation steps, so what are the new factors to consider? Ensure that those new factors to consider are properly tested, ensure that you have redundancy, and ensure that everyone's aligned. And if you go through those basic steps and protocols, you can execute. The biggest challenge is ultimately going to be, as these new formats come out, as new unknowns come out, how do you prepare for them earlier? And in turn, ensure that, some CDM partners out there or some cloud service providers out there have done the necessary work to scale for something new along with you. So
it used to be the case that the big live webcast, I'm going to go back to that term, but a big live webcast was sort of, it made people nervous. Before the event, people would get nervous. They'd have hugely overinflated expectations of audience. They'd be disappointed when the audiences were lower or whatever. But as we've seen finally in the last sort of 4 or 5 years with the advent of significant cord cutting, we've seen more and more 24/7 content being pushed out OTT. That's, I think, helped stabilize the live delivery workflow. But along with that, big events will always, as you both alluded to, will always drive innovation. So, as we get around to the next Olympics, it'll all be 4K to 8K, it'll all be whatever it is. So there's always going to be change brought in. How do you mitigate the risk when it's a big high-profile event and, Company X wants to promote 50-foot TV with 2000K resolution or whatever it is? How do you mitigate the risk of putting that type of profile event and tying it up with very cutting-edge technology, which people want to do? Do you quietly run some tests on smaller events? Or
I mean, Flavio brought it up before, but yes. I mean, that's the simplest thing, right? Everything, if you're doing consistent streaming, you have consistent events, both live streams as well as individual smaller events, you're always going to test your things both in a QA environment, in a staging environment, and development environment, but then you're also going to test it in prod. And the way you're going to test it in prod are those low profile, not many people watching events to ensure that everything runs smoothly. It's an interesting thing because you also need strong leadership within your organization to say, we're not going to follow the trend on this event just because it's what people expect. Yeah. We've been relatively consistent in what we've done for quite a while, and the end goal is slow, steady progress to deliver smooth, consistent performance across the board. And it goes down to our leadership has made that decision, and it's a great directive because it helps us execute and ensure high quality performance across the board. Does time come for innovation? Absolutely. But it has to be done in that measured approach where you factor it in, you do every single aspect of the test and do it multiple times before you roll it out to something as large scale as an Olympics or a Super Bowl. That's the only type of thing that might make you go a little nervous at this point.
Yeah, and again, it's about defining what's the major goal. If the major goal is to deliver to the users, like if you look at the first workflow we designed for Super Bowl like more than a year ago, and the final one, you will see that we changed a lot of stuff to make sure that we're going to be able to deliver like the final goal for the product. But when it comes to innovation and trying different things, you can also think about sandboxed products that you can test with. Not at CBS, but at my old company, we kind of had a sandboxed environment for like beta users or like a subscription-based product that you have a user base that's way smaller than the public users that you have. And for this environment, you can go ahead and try to be more like bold and trying like 4K or HK or like Dolby Vision, whatever.
It's kind of like the DevOps culture creeping out to the end users almost, you know.
Yeah.
So would you ever, for example, sneak in an 8K test on a big live event without announcing it and just monitor to see how it worked? Is that?
Yeah, that's, I mean, once you have an A/B test framework in place, you kind of have more freedom to, you know, like try different things. You become more brave to basically route 1% of your users to something new and see what happens. So, and also bringing this culture of learning, like you will be learning like how the user will behave as the time goes. Like I was just reading an article from Vimeo where they are like the majority, like the major focus of Vimeo is to deliver the best quality in the internet, but now they put online a 240p rendition, and it's bringing like way more people to watch content in Vimeo, and it's more about like accessibility in this case. So, you know, like how can you create this environment where you have room for testing, you have a culture where it's okay to fail, like, you know, how can you face failure and bringing this piece of R&D to your day-to-day work makes a lot of sense, especially in the video streaming world.
To your point and your point, right? It's okay to fail as no one's really watching. So you want to do a small...
Or fail quickly.
Yeah, well, fail quick and then go to the backup. But you know, if you want to try out 4K or you want to look into what might be available there, you do a small sample size. You do a known audience in a specific location or a specific environment. Outside of your QA, your staging, your dev, it might be a different stream or a different host name, and you give it out to just this small group of people. And it's those measured kind of almost prod tests is a good way to put it, that give you the ability to see what's going on and see the environment in real time, but limit your risk completely, because if you know what that user base is and you start to see an issue on it, swap it out, pull them out, give them the regular feed, and call it a day. No one will know the difference.
Yeah, and on the visibility point, it's important to have metrics from the player side, all the players, as well as the backend side and at the CDN side. You need to be able to correlate what's going on. If you just see the rebuffer rate going through the roof and you don't really have any like insight from the CDN, there's no much actionable information for you. Like you need to know if it's a CDN problem, if it's a ISP problem, if it's a geolocation problem, and you need to have in front of you ways to correlate what's happening in the player and the CDN and the origin and the on-premise encoders.
And it's a great point, and it goes back to what you were talking about with clouds before. You know, private clouds, public clouds, they give you a lot of visibility that you have in terms of your own infrastructure and your own environment, as well as your on-premise infrastructure. You get a lot of visibility there. You get a lot of visibility at the player because mostly own it, or you leverage quite a lot of the tools and services that are out there that give you that data. But there's the gap, and that gap is ISP, and that gap is CDN. Yeah. And some CDNs are more open and transparent than others with data. Some ISPs are more open and transparent than others with data. But you've got to get everyone along the same plane and along the same line on that visibility spectrum. You know, we work, we're part of the Open Caching Working Group at Disney Streaming Services as part of the Streaming Video Alliance. And one of the things that we do there that we really push for is visibility and transparency along the entire content delivery chain. And that visibility and transparency is something that is becoming more and more crucial on the ISP and on the content delivery network side to close that gap. The more that they start to move in that direction, the more you integrate with them, the more you rely on them, and the more you work with them to strengthen the performance for your end user, your end customer. And when there's an issue and something might be going on in the stream and a tooling out there that's based on some variable that might or might not be traditionally defined or consistent across the board has an issue, if you have transparency into the whole workflow, you might write it out with a CDN. Because you know what is going on at that exact moment. You might say, okay, I see what the issue is, I recognize it, I know exactly what you guys are going to go do now. Cool, go do it. And then if it's not better in like 10 or 15 minutes, we'll move away from you, but we can ride this storm out if it's that specific issue, rather than one blip triggering a change or triggering an issue.
Just to comment myself on that, I think as CDN workflows are starting to embrace microservices architecture much more, I think that's giving the introspection that has just not been there because it's been monolithic software until now, and to be quite honest, most people who build monolithic software don't know what's going on inside their software in runtime. You know, whereas
It's not just a black box to us.
Whereas microservices architecture, it's kind of inherent that you have to know that, and you have to have the interfaces and so on. So you guys don't really deal with the scaling for meeting the audience demand on the CDN side so much, or do you run CDN yourself? You've got.
I work with the CDNs to ensure the scaling, so it's my responsibility to interface with them directly, ensure that they understand what our audience size is, what our expected traffic throughput is, requiring coordination with our media encoding team to understand what the bit rates are that we're producing, as well as what the average bit rates are that we expect by device based on breakdown. And then from there, you communicate with the CDNs and say, here's what we're expecting. Here's my overhead, here's what I'm looking at. To that comment before, some CDNs are more visible than others. I would say that they're more, to your point, they're getting better at being even more visible and opening up the kimono even more. And so those conversations are more and more fruitful because you gain additional insight into how can you scale, how can you plan, where do you plan. And so it's a constant conversation. It's not just, hey, I'm doing this, give me a reservation for your event for this capacity and I'll leave you alone. It's, give me details. What's going on in this region? Do you have other things that might be going on? Obviously the CDNs can't share exactly what, but they can at least tell you what's competing for your bandwidth and figure out good ways to work with you on managing and ensuring smooth delivery.
Yeah, and again, when you like see the vendors as partners, you start talking about like the commitments that they can make, and you can have a transparent conversation on how you're going to be like shaping your CDN mix, how you're going to be like using the dynamic decisioning behind the scenes, and the bitrate ladder. Like that's something that we discussed a lot with our encoding team, and like at the end we used some technologies to basically dedicate the bits in the right place for high motion scenes. This actually impacted the CDN traffic in 35%.
Yep.
And like being clever on selecting the right bit rates and the right formats will definitely impact the traffic and the overall audience. So it's as Eric mentioned, it's all connected. Like you need to be able to work with the encoding team as well as all the origin and cloud providers, and the CDN people needs to be involved in the whole workflow from the beginning.
You sometimes need to be as dangerous, if not more dangerous, than CDN architects, right? Your role in that process is to understand the breaking points of not just one CDN, but multiple. Yeah. They only care about their own because that's their job, that's their responsibility. You care about every single one. What are the breaking points? What are the ways they do things? How are they structured? Where are they traditionally going to tip over or fall over? How's one CDN go ahead and source their content to an ISP eyeball network versus another? It all goes into your decisioning, and it also all goes into those pre-conversations. I mean, architecturally, I can say that we frequently have conversations with our CDNs where we're driving the architectural conversation, and they're just providing input as to what works best for their network.
Interesting. Peter, you were described as dangerous. So we got 5 minutes left. So if there's any questions, oh look at that, good. Where's Eric? He's not there. We've got some questions up here, and I've got a last question which I'll throw in a minute.
But, using the Super Bowl as an example, how did the latency of the stream compare to that of traditional satellite or cable broadcast? And do you see it to eventually be able to catch up or be better?
We've seen, I mean, we have a few different calculations for that, but I'd say that the internet streaming was pretty close to the broadcast. we acquired the signal in a stage in the broadcast center that helped on that. So we were like pretty close with the broadcast signal. I guess that especially for sports events, I know that low latency streaming is getting a lot of traction, especially in conferences like this. But we see that for sports events, it may make more sense to invest in synchronization more than in low latency. So it's like we are still like measuring like where should we dedicate more efforts. We have a games group that does a lot of interaction with the audience. They have a chat and they do interaction. And I think that for this case, low latency makes a lot of sense. But for sports events, I would say that having a synchronization, you can think about like geolocation synchronization where people are not watching ahead of others. It may make more sense than actually going all the way to the edge and doing ultra low latency streaming.
Yeah, I would concur with that. I think there's a lot of different competing low latency approaches out there, but the one thing that's consistent about non-low latency delivery is that it's all being built nowadays on HTTP delivery standards, which gives you the broadest mix and the most consistent and stable ability to deliver content at scale. And I think it's the at scale part that's still the gap with low latency streaming. So in order to deliver for customers a smooth, consistent experience, you prioritize, am I an extra 10 seconds behind, or are they getting the highest quality, 1080p, 60 frame per second stream that happens to have all the stats aligned with it? Yeah. And for their experience, it's completely self-contained. And I'm still kind of beating Twitter, I'm beating the news, I'm beating all the notifications. So really, why does it matter if someone's 20 seconds behind the actual broadcast if everything's aligned and in sync for their experience and their broadcast?
Just to play devil's advocate, the betting market would probably disagree with that a little bit.
Absolutely, and I kind of see cases, like I said, the video games world, it kind of demands low latency for the audience to interact with the broadcaster. We see like pretty big companies doing that, and that's why we at CBSI are investing in low latency as well, is to fulfill those cases. Like bidding is something that may make sense to invest with like ultra low latency, but for like big sports events like Super Bowl, again, I think it's more about having synchronization.
Yeah, I actually agree, well. Because I think in the betting case, actually the people who really are trying to play the bets out to the very last moment, they're watching on niche technologies. They're not the mass audience. So
and I would also say there's still things that can be done with the at-scale streaming to reduce latency, and things that you balance the risk, right? Are you doing a massive event like the Super Bowl? You might not take that risk, but are you doing an event that maybe has, a couple thousand users watching it, but it's still using your traditional workflow? Maybe you take that risk and you see what the performance might be like if you adjust timing across the board on segment size or on length or how you retrieve content. So there's opportunities there. That's.
Cool. More questions. Come on, we've got Disney and
right
CBS
here. So,
Alicia.
When there was this massive sort of shift from the data center to the cloud, I think, there were a couple of things that were being considered. There was cost, there was the management piece of it, there was the scale of it, and I don't think anyone really gave a lot of thought around the egress cost and how that would grow and how that would factor into the overall ROI for providers. And I'm just curious, as to the type of initiatives that you are deploying to really address egress, because egress is becoming more and more important.
Sure. So on our media side, right, that's our primary focus. Majority of it's still an on-premise environment. It's still built that way for a reason. If you're delivering a ton of live content, there's only so much that you can do that's unique to, or not unique, to offset any potential egress challenges that you might have, whether it be cost, performance, delivery impact that might happen from a down server in the environment, whatever it might be. So the ways you mitigate that go ahead and are certainly impacted by costs. But at the end of the day, for us, we maintain tight control of our media for a reason.
Well, I think it's more relevant to, I think the question is more relevant around VOD, playback content, and maybe DVR type content. I don't think it's as relevant.
But
Just for the sake of the webcast, I'm going to repeat that. So Alicia thinks that it's more relevant to VOD.
Yeah, and again, media on our side is served off of our premise for that reason. Partly, right? If you look at it, I'll take a use case that I've done some personal research into because I think it's interesting. If you read about what Netflix does to deliver content, they have their own CDN, their own architecture, their own infrastructure. They store their content in S3, at least they did at the last time they published something about it, and they egress out content to their caches, to their open connects during periods of low traffic, late nights, slow periods, downtimes, because they're already paying for the transit of the peaks. So they just fill the valley and they reduce their overall costs, and in turn, they're able to position their content and pay egress for some of the content and put it close enough to the end user. And it's a massive, I'm sure that they do this within their infrastructure. It's something you just kind of think about the economics of, but they don't put their content everywhere and at every edge cache, but they put it near enough to an end user that the end user can go ahead and get it and be brought to it. They also don't go ahead and go back to their origin to fetch content unless they absolutely have to for a user. So by doing that process, you reduce egress costs and you also reduce transit cost across different networks. And I'm sure that goes into their decisioning.
Yeah, it's definitely a variable to consider. Again, especially for us as we move towards the cloud for Super Bowl again, we decided to create new layers of delivery to avoid the transit. So we used Fastly Media Shield, for example, to connect with the multi-CDNs.
That wasn't a plug, was it?
I feel like it was leading somewhere.
And it's kind of like thinking of ways that you can decrease the investment on transit. I think that creating this mid layer for us was fundamental and definitely impacted the bill overall. So thinking of ways like we have business units that are completely dedicated to one cloud provider. We have other business units that are in a different cloud provider. So how can you create all the layers all the way to the delivery to kind of try to keep these objects, try to keep this content in just one cloud, avoid mixing different clouds in different workflows. So we definitely take into account the transit overall. That's something that we discuss mostly almost every day on how can we build all of these different infrastructures, taking this into account and using the products that are available to help decreasing the cost.
Something that I think doesn't get mentioned much in the CDN space, probably because it's an interesting profit, well, it used to be an interesting profit point for CDNs. Most CDNs are basically aggregating carrier purchasing. And of course, live events usually fly straight through the 95th percentile billing. So they're actually free to the CDNs, but they were some of the most significant and premium sold gigabytes, if people really still trade gigabytes. They're some of the most premium bits. So that 95th percentile billing is something that doesn't make it from the carriers to the publishers quite often. But anyway, that was it.
It's an interesting industry where the models aren't necessarily consistent across the board. Again, transparency.
Transparency, absolutely. I think we've got one more question, Eric, was it? Yeah, one more question from Charles at the front, please.
Yeah, so when you hosted the Super Bowl, that means that the audience surges to 3 or 4 times the normal everyday audience during that 4-hour window, Ordinarily, I think you need extra bandwidth, right, to support all this. And so did you have to plan for that, or you use some other tricks to go around the extra bandwidth? Because you would need that bandwidth, at least on a on-demand basis. That is to say, put it there when you need it during the Super Bowl and then take it away when you no longer need it.
Yeah, for us, the main challenge for defining the commitments on the CDN side was to predict the audience. So we just went all the way to be over provisioned. We had like a pretty big headroom that we could fit, I would say 2x to 3x the audience that we had in the game day. And of course, it's just like trying to get the numbers from the year before and make some calculations around that. Again, it's pretty hard to predict the ideal, the audience that you will have in the game day. It always depends on the game itself, like if the game is good or not. So it's like you need to take all of this into account, create a range on where you think you will land, and debate these commitments with the CDN, going back all the way to the bit rates that you will be selecting for this video, and making sure that you are comfortable with the numbers at the end of the day.
It's a good point too. You brought up 2 to 3x
Yeah.
overhead, right? There's a need for redundancy throughout the entire chain, and you can't even have that redundancy with just, hey, CDN A, I have X with CDN B, and I might need X from you as well. You have to go to both of them and procure it with both of them, and then if one of them fails, then you deal with it. Yeah. But if not, you're paying for a little bit extra insurance and security. And it's about balancing that risk. Do you pay for the insurance, or do you take a little bit more risk in an event that it might peak over what you expect? I would say that a majority of the CDN partners of ours, and I'm sure of yours, given our consistency of events, recognize, we might pay for X, but they might also secure us Y,
Yeah.
just in case. And it's part of being good partners and treating everyone like partners. And the more transparency, the more partnership approaches happen in the industry, the more new tooling, new infrastructure, new caches and environments open up, the more we have opportunity for consistency and further delivery without having to necessarily pay the penalty for everyone involved.
Absolutely.
Eric, Flavio, thank you. Amazing session.
Do we get a CMAP joke now?
No, I'll give you a head later.